you and I never had a right to go back to a Fortune 500 and say, delete my data or give me a copy of my data. There was no legal obligation for them to do it. With this law, these are changing. Think about it. Your personal finances are yours. Your personal car is yours. So why your personal data cannot be yours?
What needs to change on the organization side to really comply with this law and also make sure that it's actually they understand that it's better for them and their users?
Organizations need to change the way they've been using, collecting, recording, deleting, and sharing. Maybe I'm working with a Fortune 500 and I'm still a startup. If I have to do business with them, I have to understand they'll only work with me when I'm able to provide that or demonstrate that I am data professional.
What can the smaller organizations do? How can they make sure that they are on the right side of the law without spending a lot of money?
As a startup, don't consider your startup and you cannot invest in something which is going to help your business.
Hello and welcome to another edition of ISN Podcast. And today we are going to talk about something very important, data protection. I know you heard the term and you're already thinking about so many other things that you maybe already know about it, but do you really understand it? Well, that's what we are going to talk about today, on how organizations can really protect our users' data, on how the new law that India is introducing impacts us and how it's beneficial for us. We have an expert, we have the man who understands the world better than any of us here to break it down for us. I would like to welcome Kumar Priyank for this special episode. Kumar, welcome on board. And I hope you really help us understand what data protection, what data privacy laws are all about in this small chat that we are going to have.
Thank you, Piyush, for having me here. Always a pleasure. Now we always,
amazing.
We always say, we're pretty passionate. We love to talk privacy. So yeah, happy to be your guest on.
And that's a topic that a lot of people don't want to talk about. So it's great that you feel so greatly connected with it. I'll just quickly let people know who you are. Well, you are somebody who has 15 plus years of experience in data privacy. You are the CEO and Chief Privacy Officer of DPDP Consultants, and you love to talk about privacy clearly. That's why you are here. But more importantly, you have the expertise to implement data privacy, data security, and make sure that companies, organizations are compliant, right? So we are so glad that we can talk more about it. You can break it down for us and let us know how we can be more compliant, how we can sort of be compliant with the new DPDP law that's coming in. So let's just start with the simplest question. What is this DPDP law, right? It sounds very scary as of now.
Well, to a lot of people, it sounds scary, but I think it's a sigh of relief for a lot of us. I mean, when DPDP is India Data Protection Law. Now, when we talk about data protection regulations or legislations, it's everywhere in the world. People are very familiar with GDPR, which is one of the most strict law and is much more scary as compared to what DPDP is. But, I've seen companies wants to work with compliant companies. Companies have to follow certain compliances. And in India, I think we were solely relying on IT Act of 2000 and others. We never had data protection law. And considering how pivotal we are on the global map when it comes to the outsourcing or when it comes to the growing business or when we're trying to compete with the first world countries, it was very important for us to have a data protection legislation. Well, I think we should thank the government of India and the president for bringing that concept into reality. And we proudly have our own data protection law, and we are in the race of first world countries.
Absolutely. But it just drives me crazy to think that India being like the second or the third largest internet economy in the world, and data protection law is something that's just coming in now. Why do you think that's the case?
Yeah, there were safeguards, there were regulations around digital data. There were guidelines around this one. There were directives, I would say, but there was never a regulation. So I tell you something that yes, you have to protect the data, you have to ethically handle the data. That becomes a standard. I think this is a major shift because now there's a law. So something that we used to think about to do or not to do, that question has almost gone. It's an obligation. It's backed by the law. It's backed by the government. It's backed by some really crazy penalties for non-compliance. So we never had that land. It took us for a while. We are digitally transforming. We're trying to that biggest economy that we are aspiring for. no, I think this was the time. We entered the game late, but we're so glad we're still here to get this law in our country. So I think it's a very welcoming move, and it's good for all of us, for the organizations, for people like you and me.
Absolutely. And I also feel individuals now are getting more and more, they understand when we talk about data protection, what we're talking about. They are also concerned. They also want to make sure that their data does not fall into wrong hands. And they want to hold the organizations that are taking this data from them responsible for it, right?
Yeah, I will say for years, when we've been giving our data like candies to people, right? Like, for example, you go to a shopping mall, you go to a grocery store, or you go to a petrol pump. Everywhere, somebody is waiting to collect your phone number, your email address, or your name, and we never gave a second thought.
We give it away so easily, right? We give it away just like that.
Candies, like we're doing a charity to them, and that charity actually turned out to be a great monetizing business for the organizations. And then we are the same people who get very baffled and irritated when in the middle of your important meeting you get a call, an unsolicited call that you have no idea about, asking provide you with a credit card because they already have your name, PAN number, and your civil score. So next time we're going to be surprised, but I think we've just created it. But again, it's also just not us. It's also those organizations who've taken this data and now trying to monetize it. So I think there was a greater need of bringing a regulation with checks and balances. And that's what we have right now as a DPDP, which is the Digital Personal Data Protection Act of India. And we were illiterate, and then we became digitally literate, then we got digitally transformed. It's high time we have to digitally protect it.
Right. A very rudimentary question, treat me as somebody who does not understand anything. But I would like to know that if somebody does get hold of my data, now that we have laws in place, will it be possible for me to trace back and understand how they might have got hold of it? Because now companies would have to report data breaches and everything, right?
Yeah, not only data breaches. So I call these laws modern day privacy laws. That's what I'd say. And one of the significant change, what we've seen in modern day privacy law is that not only they tell organizations what to do, they give you a lot of rights. And the rights you can exercise as a person. I mean, you and I never had a right to go back to a Fortune 500 and say, delete my data, or you give me a copy of my data. They would probably listen to you on one of those email addresses that they have flashed off their website, but there was no legal obligation for them to do it. If my data has been violated, the burden of proof always was on me to go back to the court and say they have been unethically handled my data. With this law, these are changing because this law is backed by something very constitutional. Now, unlike life or right to liberty, we're also talking about right to privacy. It's a fundamental right in the Constitution now. And this is the law which is specific to the right. So it's my constitutional right. I can come to you and say, hey, why are you processing my data? I want you to delete my data, and you have to do it. Else, there is a Data Protection Board of India who's going to find you. So that's why I say it's the welcoming move. It's an empowerment to Indian citizens, empowerment to all of us.
Wow, that's a great point. And I don't think people ever even think about it when they think of data, right? That actually, even if they have given their data to somebody, some organization, they still have the control, especially with this law in place, to go to them and say, hey, remove my data. I don't want it in your system. I want it to be removed. I mean, that's really empowering the citizens. Good to know.
It's empowering backed by financial sanctions. That what is an icing on the cake.
Right.
Now, again, when we say data, I mean, data has a lot of meaning, but this is more about personal data. I mean, I'm ready to allow organizations to train their AI machines and machine learning and all that with the data they have collected about me. But anything that is linked to my personal data, think about it. Your personal finances are yours.
Yeah.
Your personal card is yours. So why your personal data cannot be yours?
Absolutely.
I mean, that's an analogy.
When you put it that way, it seems like, why there's a thought about it, but clearly, because we have not been brought up or presented like that, it seems like that. Tell me one more thing, again, a very basic question, because, now everything is happening online, right? From opening a bank account to making transactions to every single thing is right now online, to booking air tickets to flights. And we have to give away our data to make those processes happen, right? To to hit the success, right? So if I have to really put what really comes in the purview of a personal data,
Yeah, personal data is
and something that organizations also look at it and say, yeah, this is your users' personal data that you can come back to us and ask us to do.
I'll answer your question in two parts. First is, by the definition of personal data is any data that is able to identify you as a person. It could be your name, your phone number, your email address, your IP address, your social security or Aadhaar number, that's what we say. In fact, in certain laws, they even consider your thermal imaging as your personal data for that, or your sound or your voice as a personal data. But in Indian context, is still the name, and anything that identifies you becomes a personal data. One of the misconceptions people have about this law, that this law is asking you not to collect personal data. It's stopping the organization, it's creating those barriers, and that's not the case. They're not stopping you from providing goods and services to your users. They're not stopping you from doing business. All they say is do it under agreed or the valid or the legal ground of processing. You want my data? You take my data, but take my consent for using the data. That's what Indian DPDP says. Well, if I come back to the same analogy that I was giving you, my personal car is mine. If you want to use it, ask me, take the keys. But if you're driving my car without my knowledge, you are in violation. The same thing applies to my personal data.
Perfect, perfect. I really like the fact that you also mentioned that your IP address also falls under the purview. And I'm sure that most people don't even think about it because that's hidden data, right? That's data you're giving without even knowing that that's going your way. So we understood the individual side a lot better. Let's go on the organization side, right? Right? You mentioned that organizations are scared with this law coming in that it will make their business difficult, but that's not the case, right?
That's not the
What
case.
needs to change on the organization side to really comply with this law and also make sure that it's actually they understand that it's better for them and their users?
See, organizations need to change the way they've been using, collecting, recording, deleting, and sharing the data. You know, those reckless, hidden privacy notices somewhere in the TNC needs to go away. Those pre-ticked boxes needs to go away. Conditions that you have to give me this data, then only you can use my services. You need to buy my credit card, then you can use my banking services. That's preconditions have gone away. Organizations need to be more transparent. And that transparency comes from the fact is to have a very robust privacy notice on their public facing platforms, letting you know. So if I go to your website, I should know why you're collecting my data. What are you going to do with my data? Whom are you going to share that data with? How long you're going to retain my data? And what can I do with my data if I come to you? Give me a mechanism. That's all checks that organization needs to do that. That framework of privacy have to be established in the DNA of the organization. And then, I call that should be the fabric of the organization. Organization now should be collecting data with my consent. As I said, it's my personal data. You want to use my data, feel free to, but do not use my data without my consent. Now, when you have received my data, handle it with care, right? I will again go back to the car analogy. I've given you my keys, drive my car, handle it with care, keep it secure. Keep my data secure. Do not sell my data. Do not give it to someone who cannot handle it, my data. Third-party transfers, I'm wrong.
Right.
So there's a lot of obligations for organizations when they are custodian of your data to collect the data properly, to secure the data properly. And that's what I was even referring to. One of the events that I had is procuring the data is equally important. Organizations are totally engrossed in securing the data. But if you haven't procured the data legally or in the rightful way, there's no fun of securing the data.
Absolutely. And you do go to and speak at so many BFSI and similar events where, there are these organization heads which would have concerns about the law. What do you think their biggest concern is when it comes to implementing the law, right? One is the cultural side, as you said, you need to make it part of your fabric. But I'm sure they're more concerned also from a technical and a cost and all those aspects as well. Something that you see that, that comes up again and again from these organizations.
Absolutely. When I meet the organization heads, I would say their head starts rolling. I've been given a lot of comments saying that what are you doing to us? I said it's not us, it's the government is doing to us. We've been so oblivious of the fact that we have an obligation on protecting the data, securing or taking the data with a consent, because it was we always thought it's a matter of right. I will collect your data in the way I want. I would not, I mean, it was a reckless collection of the data. Organizations now, when they are exposed, global organizations who've been operating worldwide are very familiar because they comply with GDPR regulations, they comply with CCPA or any of the regulations they're doing business in. But Indian organizations, while they are very, very good in securing the data because the security controls are amazing on a lot of organizations, there are guidelines from, say, for example, in BFSI sector, I say RBI guidelines are there, and there are other guidelines that do to secure the data. But they haven't really given a lot of thought about collecting the data properly.
Right.
Every now and then we see a lot of news coming in where organizations are being questioned by their judicial authorities in terms of malpractices, in terms of collection of the data, wrong KYCs, selling me a credit card when I only want your saving bank account services. So challenges when you talk about, when I meet these heads, a few of the common challenges, if I can outline for you, will be how to take a consent. And when I say consent, it's very, very large term, valid consent. How to collect minimum amount of data to give you the same services. We call it the data minimization. How to avoid secondary use of the data. I collected your data for X and I should be using it for Y. And how to ensure third-party compliance, how to ensure those risk mitigations. And these are the usual questions I get from organization head. And that's where we try to help.
What I really like is that, these are some of the things that the larger organizations can definitely put in place because they have the teams, they have the resources, they have everything available to them. But what can the smaller organizations do? How can they make sure that they are on the right side of the law without spending a lot of money?
Absolutely. I mean, even I really recommend smaller organizations, or for that matter, startups, to foster and fortify their compliance, because it's crucial for them. They're smaller organizations, but they're going to be big. Nobody wants to be small anymore. Startups, even if they're a startup, they're going big. They want to enter into a bigger market. What we have seen right now is organizations only want to work with compliant organizations because there's a chain of custody of data that you have to protect. So maybe I'm working with the Fortune 500 and I'm still a startup, but that if I have to do business with them, I have to understand they will only transfer those data to me, or they will only work with me when I'm able to provide that or demonstrate that I am data protection compliant. So we should not be thinking about compliance as an add-on activity. Of course, it does comes with a cost, but I would say it will cost you more than what the business you are aspiring to get. So my recommendation to the smaller companies is go ahead, seek compliance. It will help you foster your business because non-compliance is now becoming a business deterrent to organizations. Organizations do not want to work with another vendor if you're not compliant. They will still look for your compliance. And when it comes to cost, I always refer to Paul McNulty, who said, if you think compliance is expensive, you should try non-compliance.
I think we should put that on a billboard because that's a great statement. But do let me know this, that, I understand why we should get compliant as an organization, but how do we go about it? Are there organizations like DPDP consultants that we should approach? Or are there other ways that we can actually start the process and then, at some stage we should look at more expert help? What would be the ideal, if I have to really put steps to sort of start implementing slowly, because this will be a step-by-step process only? How should one?
Absolutely. Very curated, and I think we have a very tailored approach, or any other organizations who's getting into data compliance. It does require a lot of collaboration and an effort, and it is done in a stage wise. So just because you mentioned my firm DPDP, I would say the offerings that we provide to the market is based on the requirement of the compliance. I usually say there are two kind of organizations. One who have done something about their compliance. They have been compliant with other privacy regulations like GDPR or say, for example, PDPL. They have those elements of DNA of privacy already there. For them, we provide them with a gap analysis and recommendations that let us evaluate your current framework. Let me understand what is the gap between your current privacy framework and what DPDP expects you to be. What is the delta and how we can suggest recommendation for you to be compliant. But there are a lot of organizations that we meet who haven't thought about compliance because they were not global, or probably they were operating only within India. And they are huge organizations. I'm not only talking about smaller ones as well. There are bigger ones that they have not started their compliance. So, and now I'm trying to help them with bringing, compliance from ground level to where it should be. So there are several stages. Understanding, I always say that law is one, but businesses are different.
Right.
So what we try to do is we try to understand their business. We try to find how the law is applicable to them, on what activity they do, where there's a applicability. Then we go ahead and set up those privacy frameworks, those right frameworks, audit frameworks, train those people. And that's a very interesting topic. It's something maybe you'd like to know more about. Employee training is very crucial. And then we audit them. So it's usually months of exercise. Standard is like 3 to 4 months for an organization. But once you've done that, once you have that foundation laid already in your organization, then it's just a matter of maintaining and continuing with it. It's almost like you will probably spend a few weeks, I always take the drivers and the cars analogy because I relate a lot to it. Initial few days, remember when you started driving, and that's what your compliance is. Now don't you even look at your gear knob when you're driving. You already know where to shift. That's what we try to bring those people from those organizations, train them, bring those compliance, and let them be on their own.
Right. Because, I have to ask this because a lot of our listeners, are startup founders, people who are, even at idea stage, or they are already at a stage where their startup is just kicking off and growing, right? What would you recommend for them, that how they can make this part, the compliance part and data protection part of their business plan, and how they can sort of think about it from day one and not have to, like you said, come at some point and think of it like this big elephant in the room that needs to be addressed?
Right. And then I think, I think I briefly touched upon that, but I think that's a very good question. We also have heard about startups being exempted, but I think startups play a very crucial role in our economy. I mean, lately we've seen the advent of startup in India has gone beyond roof. I would say just because you're a startup doesn't mean you're not up to something very big. So we should stop thinking about startup being just a small firm with limited resources. We've seen what happened with Zomatos and the Ubers of the world and Spotify or Facebook. So eventually all they were startup. Right? I think you make your mark in the industries as equally important. If you're a startup and you want to do with a business with Amazon or Google's of the world, don't think that they will ignore the fact that you're not data protection compliant just because you're a startup. As I said,
Right.
So when you talk about privacy law or how privacy functions, the most crucial part is you think of privacy first and then you think of your business. We call it privacy by design. It should be a proactive rather than a reactive effort when it comes to privacy. That's the essence of data protection law. A startup who's able to demonstrate it, think about privacy first, and then the business later is likely to get much more business from the bigger clients than the one who just think that they need an exemption. I would definitely recommend startup. Don't let your client go just because of a compliance that you really need to have.
Yeah, and as a startup, you want every business out there. Especially, I think when there's a company that says, "I care about users," and most startups do start off at that point. I think this should be a no-brainer that we need to keep our users, our customers' data protected and secure at all points. So this has to be, like you said, privacy should not be a second thought or something that has to be just built in.
Absolutely. I always say, share your data with a company who care about your data. Share your data where your data is cared. As a startup, you have much more responsibility in terms of ensuring that the people that you meet, your onboarding or your customers, you're able to bring that trust into them. And that's just not doing ISOs and PCI DSS is a larger aspect to it, because you probably are offering that 4 other firms are also offering. Why would I come to you and see you have no control over the data? I give you all my data and tomorrow it's live with someone else. I think there's a greater onus of a startup to build that trust with their customers, project themselves as a compliant company to their businesses, and earn that respect from data consumers.
Perfect. Now, I'm aware that the law was passed sometime last year, I think August 2023. And, companies do have certain timelines that to be able to adhere with the law and sort of update their systems. So are there certain timelines that they need to keep in mind? Is it something that they need to do it right away? Is it, or they can sort of think about it at some point? Like, are there certain guidelines already prescribed around the law?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. And I try to address it with a lot of customers and prospects that we meet is what they have to understand. So there are two parts of the law. One is the enactment. Second is the enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
When When we talk about what happened with this law in August 2023, the law was enacted. When I say it was enacted, it was signed by Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha after a lot of public consultation. It actually transformed itself from a bill to a law. Both parliament passed, president assented it. It's formally a law that was enacted, which means it's a law of the land, it is in effect. Of course, data protection laws are always evolving. If you look at GDPR, it's evolving till date. I mean, it evolved when it was brought in, then it got further evolved, then Brexit happens, then US data framework protection framework happened. The law keeps on evolving based on understanding how the market and the businesses respond. So DPDP will also evolve, but the law is in effect. And I think the better we start getting onto this law, getting compliant, because it's not something that we can run a magic wand and make it compliant tomorrow. This is a practice that has to be inbuilt in your business operations. So the second part, which is enforcement, of course, there will be a Data Protection Board of India who will be enforcing this, the penalties or other guidelines too. And of course, there are certain granularities of the rules which are yet to come. But what law expects from the organization is no surprise. It is pretty well out. There's a gazette already out there. We go and read it on the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology website. Again, and as you know, this is like probably the fifth time I'll be giving the same example of cars and driving. I would say is the traffic cams have already been placed on the expressway, capturing your speed as on August 11th. You are free to speed up. It's just that your parking tickets or your challans will come maybe once the enforcement board comes. They will start looking at what you've been doing so far. So I would rather drive slow rather than getting a ticket later.
Absolutely. So as of now, although the mandate has not come in, like you said, it's better to be on the right side of the law, be compliant. But are there specific timelines that have been prescribed out there from when the penalties, let's say, or the challans will kick in?
That's exactly since the time the camera was up. I would say August 11th is in effect. It enacted, it's in effect. There's nothing. Some granularities and rules might come here and there. The board is going to be formed, but the law is in effect. There is no refuting of the fact. And you see, I meet with a lot of the financial institutions and healthcare now there's a cross-sectoral law, so we talk about all the sectors. Everybody has started doing this. It's a very simple example. Every day I explore the same application and same companies that I have been associated for a very long time. I've seen the shift in their modus operandi now. I was flying to Mumbai a day before. Started with DigiYatra taking my consent. Every time you go to DigiYatra, try to upload your boarding pass. Every time you upload your boarding pass, it will ask you for a consent. And then when I was trying to check in with Indigo has started taking consent. So you see these bigger airline firms and government firms, they already have started doing this. They know consent is the key to DPDP. So they have already started moving. They're not waiting for something. Well, some of them are definitely waiting, but my question is, why wait when you have to do it eventually?
Absolutely. Why wait? And it's something that will take a little while to put in. So you rather get the wheels rolling. And what you mentioned is something I've also noticed that, unlike earlier where terms and conditions would be just a checkbox, which will already be checked when you are filling a form, now there's specific pop-ups that come. There are specific, ways that people are communicating that, hey, you have to agree to these things before we proceed. So I'm guessing that's one way of how the law is coming in effect. However, that gets me curious. How does an organization or individual find out if a company or a website is compliant or not?
But if I go to a website, there are a couple of things I definitely see. One is, as a consumer, I go to a website, I would like to understand that what kind of cookies they are leaving me, how much they are tracking me. I usually, when you see my site, they will have a lot of cookie control. We understand there are certain cookies that you need because you want the functionality of your website to work the way it is intended to. But then there are others which are just, silently sitting, tracking me because of the sales and marketing or for the other reasons, or probably for the analytics. Well, the choice is mine. You can enforce your strictly necessary cookie to enhance your site experience, but you cannot enforce me to track me just because I don't want. So cookie is something that I would always look on a website. Privacy notice is something that I'm always interested in knowing. I would like to see if they have a data protection officer. I would like to see if they have a consent manager. I would like to see if they're going to honor my rights. I have to see if there's a complaint mechanism they have provided to me in case if they are not able to handle it. I have to see if there's a grievance redressal has been taken care of by a grievance officer. I have to see when I send all the data, how are they collected? Are they serving me with a privacy notice? Would they inform me if the privacy notice changes? Or if the privacy notice dates back to pre-Independence Day? There are a lot of websites are like, you have no idea when the last privacy notice was updated. If they are recently updated as per DPDP, I feel more confident submitting my data. People are getting aware. They are getting aware about data protection regulation. You will see that shift in people and consumer behavior on an ongoing basis.
And since you mentioned this, it sounds like companies need to have a specific team to be compliant, right? They need to have this data protection officer, the grievances team. Are there certain guidelines on how they can build these teams as well to stay compliant in the long run?
Well, absolutely. I think when we talk about data protection team, we always recommend organizations to have a mixture of a team who have a good amount of experience in IT security, somebody who's been in the part of governance, risk and compliance, or anybody who's coming from risk and compliance team, IT security, a little bit of legal flair also helps. That the team, that's a closed-knit structure that we want to have. But for a lot of organizations might not be needed. Some organizations or smaller organizations do not want to spend that much. So they need to at least have one face, which is the data protection officer or a consent manager. Or now there are a lot of offerings, like the one we offer is an outsourcing of your data protection office. Okay. So we take care of the privacy for you while you focus on your building your business.
Oh, that sounds amazing. Any examples you can give of, a use case where this could have come handy, or somebody who would have reached out and
we're tied up with the non-disclosure agreement, so I cannot name the clients in particular because, but yes, there are protection offices are getting outsourced. So we act as a data protection officer because data protection officer is more of a role than a person who needs to handle the transactional privacy. So a lot of companies where we have done compliance have hired us as a outsourced data protection officer. So we know the transactions that they get in terms of privacy complaints, or when they're signing a new contract, or when they're onboarding a vendor, or when they are talking about starting a new functions, or they get a complaint or a request from the users. All of that's been taken care of by us in the entire process. And we've done this for multiple sectors and multiple business verticals, not specific to one.
Any specific sectors? I know you cannot name businesses, but where you see this predominantly?
IT and fintechs, I would say, from that we have started with. There was one. It's kind of it's actually wearable, so I don't know if it falls under. It was like pharma and healthcare. You can also talk about, but ITs and fintechs have outsourced the data protection officers to office to us.
Amazing.
Because some of them are smaller. They really want to work on their business rather than worrying about this and the hefty penalties that this law or GDPR, for that matter, might come to them. So we take care of that.
Amazing. I really like the fact that there is a out of the box, solution available, which I can just go and plug and play into my organization and sort of at least start the journey of the compliance process a lot more easier. I mean, I think that does sound really good.
Not only that, but I think we also have design and based on our experience. So I've been in this industry for a while. We have done global implementation. Based on our experience, we have actually created our own tools. So my team has been working behind the scenes for about a year or so, and all the inspiration that we've taken from GDPR, because not only DPDP, but I'm also a co-founder of GDPR Consultants. So during those days, whatever we have learned, we have put in all our knowledge into creating some very innovative tools that does actually plug and play. It goes and get white labels, and it helps you manage your privacy on an automated way. You're just one click to know what is the stage, what is the state of your compliance. That's another thing that we provide.
That's amazing. I mean, and it amazes me more that there's so much work happening in this field, and most organizations are still not completely aware of it, right? So the more, I really think that with this law coming in, I think the awareness will kick in, like you said, enactment will happen, and we will definitely be heading towards a digital economy, which is safe and secure for people to go about it. So,
absolutely. I'm witnessing those awareness getting every single day. I meet people who are now getting aware. Yes, it's a process which is going on. Once they will see some real enforcement coming in, I think I will ring a lot of bells.
Got it. Got it. Since we talked about a lot of these plug and play solutions, and you may not have all the answers from top of the, from top of your hand, but just if you can give me an idea, if an organization does want to implement this, right? What kind of a timeline and budgets they should keep in mind to sort of get the process started and reach a certain point where they can say we are compliant?
So, when we talk about timelines, when we talk about budget, that is directly proportional to the kind of business activity they are in and the kind of,
Right.
I call them processing activity. How many activities they have wherein they process the personal data. That's a very
Right.
crucial aspect. So what we do is, when we start, we try to understand their business. No, and I mean, you even think about, it's almost like their scale is our scale. So if I have to deploy the solutions to a startup versus a Fortune 500, of course, my timeline, resources, scale, pricing, everything will be stretched. But I'd say that if I have to draw a connection or draw a parallel, I would say the proportion, the efforts and the timelines and the costs are directly proportionate to the amount and the scale of business you have that has personal data in it.
So I think the best way to get started is start talking about it internally in your organization and then approach somebody like DPDP to sort of understand what it takes to get there, right?
Absolutely. I think cognizance is very much required.
And
It's a need of the hour and the law of the land.
And I'm sure that, with this conversation, a lot of people are now thinking of going for that driving school, examination and get behind the wheel and actually start learning how to drive. But tell me this, because we are sort of also getting towards the end of this conversation, if there's one thing you would like to leave, all our startup listeners, entrepreneurs who are listening and who are tuning in with a thought, with an advice around compliance and data protection, what would that be?
Yeah, I think my final thought is, as a startup, because I've been in startups and I can tell you, don't consider your startup and you cannot invest in something which is going to help your business. As a startup, even if you're a startup, you do spend on marketing, you do spend on sales, you spend on your website, you spend on your people. So why not spend on compliance? Because if you think that you're going to get an exemptions, maybe from the law, there are certain provisions that the startups might be exempted because they might not have the resources to put in the privacy. But again, it's not only running away and shying away from the statutory or the regulatory framework. It's as a startup, I don't want to be startup a couple of years down the line. I want to grow. And in order to grow, I need more business. And I've seen smaller firms also whose sales guys do an amazing job tapping a real big client, and they just come and ask them to do a vendor risk assessment and ask them to demonstrate their DPDP compliance. That's where the problem comes. Not because you need to be afraid of those 250 crore penalty from the government, just because you have to foster your business. I've seen as a customer, if I come to you on your website, I don't care if you're a startup and you cannot, hold my data or cannot process my data ethically. I will not let you play with my data just because you're a startup. I would rather go to somebody else who can. So a lot of time people think that we just need to run away and take exemptions. I would say no, focus on it. As a startup, earn trust, earn your business, earn your consumers, protect yourself and project yourself as a data protection compliant business. And as a startup, the first thing you should know or you should do is to ensure you're no longer a startup in the coming year, on a 1 year or 2.
Amazing. So if you don't want to stay a startup, start taking data protection and privacy seriously. Love that thought. Really great. And I'm so glad we had this conversation because I know I'm going to go back and have a lot of these conversations with other entrepreneurs and make sure they start taking their users' data seriously. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for being here, Priyank, and giving your time to help us understand this landscape so much better. Thank you.
Absolutely. As I said, from being passionate to privacy to now running a firm where we call ourselves partner in privacy, we love to talk privacy. It was a great conversation. We enjoyed every bit of it. Thank you for having me, Piyush.
Thank you, Priyank.